We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Straight talking. Fearless. Provocative. Straight talking. Welcome to The Pledge, the programme committed to straight talking and telling it like it is. Today, June will be taking on the N-word. James has got a few things to say about the BHS blame game. Michelle is asking what's wrong with being a winner. And Emma has a plan to sort out fatism. But first, it's my turn. Now, as chairman of the Football Association, a job I'm giving up in the summer, I'm supposed to be unbiased. But I, along with millions of other football fans, was delighted when 5,000 to 1 outsiders Leicester City won the Premier League title on Monday night. Because what the success of Leicester and likely runners-up Tottenham has done this season is destroy the view perpetuated over the years by certain Premier League managers that English boys are not good enough to play at the top level. Hopefully, what their success means is that some of England's bigger clubs who spent a fortune on developing young players, never to give them a real chance in the first team, might finally realise that they have the talents they need in their own academies, if only they give them the chance.
I started to believe that the only way you're going to win English football in the Premier League is just by throwing money. So every year you see, you know, when they're going out buying players, you know, 500 million, 100 million, etc. Leicester's put that squad together for just under 30 million, you know, whereas Manchester City, 400 million. So if I'm Manchester City right now, I must be feeling pretty sick, saying, actually, despite all that money I spent, here's a team that literally has spent for the entire squad less than I paid for one player, and yet they've outperformed us. I think it's amazing.
I think
True
what
testament.
it came down to was that sheer passion and determination. It was incredible.
This is an anomaly. It's a black swan, as they call it. It's a 1 in a million, or 1 in however many the odds were. You know,
1 in 1,000.
Whatever
Okay,
it
he
is.
did say 1 in 5,000.
Right, OK, sorry, I should be listening better, Jane. do tell me off on this side of the table. But seriously, you know, you're not going to make a business plan based on 1%. You know, 99% of the time, you need to have a load of money, a load of expensive players, and that's what wins the Premier League. I'm happy to be alive at a time to actually see it's not just about money. It's really refreshing. Growing up in Manchester, you know, it's a city of football. You can't escape it wherever you go. This makes me feel like how it must have been years ago, where it was a competition. You know, anybody could win. But it's interesting. Graham Lasseau, fellow pledger, was talking to him before.
Is that what we're called now?
Yeah,
Pledgers.
Talking to him about this. He's gutted he's not here to take you on about this, Greg. So I'm going to be his person, his representative, and say that he wanted me to say that he learned his game, the best stuff he knew, from foreign players. What do you say to that?
Oh, I'm sure that's right. I'm sure there's some good foreign players, good foreign managers who help teach, but there are a lot of good English kids. We've probably got the best academy system in the world, and those kids get to the age of 17 or 18 and there's nowhere to go. And actually what happens is well over half of them just disappear from the game altogether. And it's a tragedy. I think we're not being fair to them. We either shouldn't take all these kids in and put them through this system, or we've got to give them a proper way
and use them properly
through to the first team.
Greg, how do we compare to the rest of Europe? So do we train better in the UK against Spain or Italy?
Oh, no, we've got far fewer indigenous players playing in our leagues than, say, the Germans, the Spanish, the French. Far fewer.
Why?
Well, because we've got so much. Our clubs have got much more money. They can buy from anywhere. The problem is we buy kids at 21, 22 who've played 200 games somewhere else. Our kids don't get 200 games anywhere. There's nowhere to play.
But don't you think, Greg, which is why England does so badly? Because we're not training enough of our own. Because actually, if we do what you're saying we should do, eventually that will mean that the national team gets better too.
Well, that's the point. You want more English kids coming through, basically. Oh, and in Scotland, more Scottish
kids. And Scotland as well,
but
of course.
Scotland's had the same problem with the number of foreign players compared to bringing their kids through. Yeah. But we've somehow got to give an opportunity for these kids to get proper football. Now, they used to play, in Graham Lassau's time, they used to play reserve team football. That's all gone.
I'll represent him.
Yeah,
so you,
representative.
you look a lot like it. But they used to play reserve team football, but there is no reserve team football anymore. So these kids never really play against adults on their way up. And if you talk to the Rio Ferdinand generation, that group of people, they'll all tell you they learnt it by playing reserve team football.
So what's the lesson? I mean, really important question here for you, Greg. So if I'm Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, what is the lesson that's been demonstrated by Leicester?
And Tottenham.
Well, they've shown, and Tottenham, because Tottenham, well, I think they've shown that you can, if you get the right team spirit, you get the right coach, you get together, you can bring together a group of players and win without spending a fortune.
How much do you think it was because of the manager? You know, because what happened at Chelsea recently, where the demise of that one manager virtually destroyed the team.
Well, remember, Leicester, under a different manager, were bottom of the league Christmas before last and had a great second half of the season.
With the
and
same
that was
squad?
before that same, well, not totally the same squad, but a lot of the same squad, but with a different manager. So, no, it's about a range of different things, I think. You know, if you could say this is what does it, everybody would do it, wouldn't they?
So can I ask you a question, as you are the sort of expert where football's concerned? So
just so you know, he didn't answer my question.
Yeah, well, that's normal. We're used to that. So I am a Tottenham supporter, and you know, I'm from the area, so love Tottenham. Is it okay that I'm temporarily a Leicester City supporter through this process? Am I allowed to do that?
I think. Well, Tottenham, it's been the hardest for, because, of course, you were second and could have won it.
Yes.
So, but everybody else, I think, was a Leicester supporter this week.
To get back to this for a moment, surely if we aren't going to take more of our local players, if we aren't going to train them up, I mean, maybe you could say this proves the case, but people are saying it's a bit of a one-off. Is there now an acceptance of what you're saying in the FA? Is it going to change?
Well, I think in the clubs, I think in the bigger clubs, they've suddenly started looking. They watched James Vardy come out of non-league football and get into the England
the fact
team.
You call him James Vardy.
They've watched him come out of non-league football, and they've watched him be the top scorer in the Premier League, and they've suddenly thought, hang on.
We can do this.
Are there others? Because Leicester didn't pay a fortune for him. They paid almost nothing.
And in terms of the exporting of our players, how do we do? If we've got all these young boys coming up,
when other people start buying?
Well, it is one of the issues that very few English players go and play abroad. Compared, and that's partly about the money. I mean,
Gareth Bale he's English.
Well, Gareth Bale is, but Gareth Bale is at the very top of his. And
then on Saturday we've got Middlesbrough, so they could do the same, correct?
You've got them doing what?
Middlesbrough.
Oh, you've got a game of Middlesbrough-Brighton for who gets promoted into the Premier League.
Well.
It's worth £100 million, that game.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
another.
Really?
Yeah, it's worth £100 million to the winner.
But why don't people buy British male footballers? Why don't they want us?
I think there's so much more money. You earn so much more money in the game here.
Right.
Oh.
So Real Madrid and Barcelona can afford it. They can, but the rest of Spanish football couldn't afford to pay what the English clubs pay.
Got you.
Okay, so what do you think is going to happen now? If you're putting this forward, you've got to when? When do you leave?
No, I've got to July, so it's not going to change the world. But I've been trying to change this for 3 years, and actually we've put it on the agenda. It is now an issue. Not enough English players. I mean, this season I think Premier League is 30% English players.
Greg, have you introduced a quota system to say?
Would you do that?
You can't do a quota system. It's
you've got to have
under European law. You can't have a quota system saying you've got to have so many English players. You can have a quota system saying you've got to have so many homegrown players.
Definition of homegrown?
Yeah.
Well, homegrown means that I think they've got to be here at 15 or something, or 16. I mean, but all sorts of people count as homegrown. Fabregas, who plays for Chelsea in France, he counts as homegrown. But if you could, yes, at the moment you've got to have 8 homegrown players in a squad of 25. If you could change that to 12 or 13, but the Premier League's got to agree to that, and so far I don't think they will.
OK, so I will be going back to Tottenham then, Greg. OK, now it's time for black people to stop using the N-word once and for all. This week, in front of millions of viewers, the comedian Larry Wilmore caused a storm by saying this to President Obama.
Words alone do me no justice. So, Mr. President, if I'm going to keep it 100, yo, Barry, you did it, my did it.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Oof, painful. Wilmore has since admitted that the tone did not fit the room. Understatement. I would go a step further and say he completely misjudged it, and it was downright disrespectful. If black people continue to use the N-word willy-nilly as if it's a term of endearment, we can't keep complaining about the inappropriate use of the word by white people. Women would never use the B word in such a manner, nor the Jewish community the Y word, or Asian people the P word. It's not about reclaiming these words. It's about confining them to history, where they belong.
Oh, OK, June. While I'm with you in the sense of what I think went wrong here, from my point of view, is that this word was used in a public forum to describe
the president of the United States.
OK, but let me put this to you. First of all, my CD rack, showing a bit of my age here, was filled with hip-hop when I was growing up. And the N-word is throughout that. You couldn't learn any of the songs that I loved, singing along in my car, without saying the N-word, right? So some people have said, and I've read quite a few sort of black writers since this speech went out, I actually felt pride seeing him do this. A completely different view of you. This is a word I've reclaimed. It's a word that we're using as a term of endearment. And very interestingly, Barack Obama and the White House have not condemned it. So I put it to you. Let me propose something. Yeah. It's the context within which you say it, and a lot of black people say white people can never say that word, and I totally respect that and believe that, but black people within their own context or whatever feel like they can say it and should be able to say it, because on your point about Jews, I don't hear it very often, but I do hear Jewish people when just around the table making certain silly shorthand remarks or little quotes to each other that if a non-Jewish person said it or someone else said it, they would never be OK with it.
Well, I'm going to pick up on your point, Ari, the president, and I've got a great clip here by Josh Earnest, who's the White House press secretary, with his answer. It's hilarious. Let's have a look. The president expressed,
Well, what the president said is that he appreciated the spirit of Mr. Wilmore's expressions on Saturday night.
A white guy defending this now. He can't say the word.
I have to agree with you, June. I don't like the word. I don't like any words that are in that sort of area. Yes. I just don't think that we should be using them. I think that, you know, also I was listening to a Beyonce song you were talking about when you were growing up, but the new Beyonce song has got it in it as well. So what she's saying is that, you know, this is acceptable for you all to say it and to use it, and I think it's wrong. I don't think we should be using words like that at all.
Isn't it hypocritical?
Whether you're black or you're white.
That you say it's OK for us to use it, but you can't use it.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, and I think that almost by doing it yourself, you're kind of encouraging people to say it's OK. Yes. So I think, you know, as a coloured person myself, I think we should lead by example. Completely. You know, we should demonstrate ourselves. It's not OK.
It's not OK.
That we shouldn't be using it, and I think if people see that we find it offensive, that we wouldn't do it, more likely you won't do it. But I think, you know, if you're sitting around at a table, and even if it's amongst yourselves, you've got kids or other people in front of you, I just think you send the wrong message.
And also, I think that the thing that we really have to take into consideration is the history of that word. You know, there is so much painful, there is almost a destruction of an entire race associated with that word. And I think a lot of the younger generation don't understand this because of hip-hop music and because they've grown up hearing this word used willy-nilly. And, you know, Emma, I love those songs as much as you do. But one thing that hip-hop is brilliant at is coming up with words that then become part of popular culture. I'm sure you say bootylicious, Greg.
When I was a
I heard it. We can come up with something else.
When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a dog called that name, with the name that none of us are allowed to say even here.
Wow. Was it black?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. But it wasn't aimed. It was not racist in those days. It was seen as meaning black.
Yes.
Right. But now I agree with you. It's not acceptable. And it's if you're sort of good white liberals, like half of us, I mean, you sit there, you're not quite sure how you should react to it. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really shocked at President Obama's reaction to that as well.
Well, I think, but also, how else could he have reacted in that room? Wrong. He couldn't react. He couldn't have said anything else. At the end of the day, it was his final White House correspondent event. He couldn't have reacted in a sort of an angry way. That would have changed.
He
the whole
could have
he
done. I
was,
agree,
like,
you can't be
excited.
angry, but I think, you know, by standing up, if that was me, I wouldn't have been angry, because you're right, inappropriate.
Yeah.
But I would have just turned around and said, inappropriate
Hang on a
comment.
minute, though. I've watched the whole of the speech, the whole 22 minutes of Mr Wilmore's speech.
Yeah. And I love Larry Wilmore.
But hang on, he didn't do very well throughout the speech, we should also add. He said he lost the room from the beginning, it was all going wrong. He also made some comments in that speech that were, not using that word, but particularly about having a black leader in charge. So he made a joke about race already, saying, well, when you leave, make sure you take all your weird ethnic objects with you. He also said to Obama... He also said to Obama, make sure you take all your cocoa butter with you, because the next white guy or white woman won't know what to do. You're all laughing, right?
But that's true.
But it's interesting.
I'm just shocked.
I understand. Yeah, but the thing is, it's humour, it's on the edge, and I think we get into a very dangerous space. And I'd love to hear what you think on this, but banning words, OK? If we move to a place where we ban words, context is all. Context is totally all. But banning, just wait, banning, the bedrock of democracy, the bedrock of freedom, is that we don't, you know, have to burn books, we don't have to burn ideas, and we don't have to ban words. But context is all.
No, but
what would you say? So one of the bloggers I read, she wrote a great piece for The Guardian, and she said when he stood up there and said, you know, my N, whatever, banging his chest, and Barack Obama bangs his chest right back, and they have this brotherly moment. They're the same age, these two men, and they're in their mid-50s. He never thought he'd live to see the day of a black president. She said, I felt my heart surge, I felt pride. What would you say to a black person who says, I like that word to be used in a different way, I've reclaimed it? I'll give you another example. Gay people have reclaimed the word queer, right? I had somebody writing for me, and I was editing her, and she wanted me to put queer throughout the whole article. As a queer woman, I feel this. I said, I can't put queer throughout the whole piece in a mainstream newspaper. And she said, but that's the word I use about myself. We're queer as folk, we're queer. And I was like, I can't use that, but you can.
But Emma, what I would add to that is, you know, we still do not live in an equal society. We still have young black men that are being stopped and searched all day long. We see them being shot left, right and centre in America. So therefore, we are not at a place yet where we can pretend that this word no longer has those same sorts of connotations. We're not there yet.
I've never heard it negatively. You know that. I've actually grown up. I grew up in Manchester, now I live in London.
As a black person, I've heard it.
No, but...
I've been called it.
Have you?
Negatively, of course. And the pain you feel when you are called that word is something I would never... It's so offensive.
I just don't see any need to use it.
There's no need for it.
I think we're just skirting around the issue. The answer is it's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable.
We shouldn't be doing it. We should respect each other.
I think certain people would argue that certain words, and perhaps you won't agree with this particular word because it's so laden with history, can be reclaimed.
I think
you're in a slippery slope when we have to ban words.
Says the journalist. So we disagree with you, Emma.
Right. There may be one or two people on Twitter who find themselves thinking they may feel the same, but I think it's context. Genuinely,
this is not about one or two.
This
is the masses.
It's not about, you know, I think it was the wrong place for him to do it.
But also, I think this is a lot of people who also don't fully understand the history. You know, these are not kids who've marched with Martin Luther King. You know, these are not kids who've seen relatives lynched and so forth. So therefore, they don't truly understand the history of it.
Can you reclaim queer? So people who've marched for gay rights, people who've been beaten...
I mean, I'm not gay, but I wouldn't want to.
Don't use one word to justify another. We're talking about the N word.
I'm talking about, can you reclaim words?
And
I think in this particular context, we know it's wrong, it's offensive, it shouldn't be allowed. I think we should stop it.
I'm testing it to the absolute nth degree, which
I
is
really
why
don't want to say this, but if
Right.
you're really going to provoke me, I'm going to say it. For those reasons, I'm out.
OK. I was ready. So now I've been on television with you. Because I'm never going to be a dragon.
What I find interesting is that we're not even allowed... We're discussing the use of a word that
we're not using.
We're not allowed to use.
Yeah.
And that seems bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Well, we're not even allowed to have it on the clip.
No.
And it was deemed OK enough to be in front of the leader of the free world who banged his chest.
Well, it wasn't OK enough, and I think Larry Wilmore, who I love, I'm a huge fan of Larry Wilmore's, but I think he's seen for himself that it wasn't OK.
OK, guys, so life is full of winners and losers, and it's time for us all to accept that. Fair and open competition is essential in the world of business, but it's also part of everyday life. However, a lot of my friends' kids now take part in school sports days where there's no winners, no medals or prizes for coming first. I think this is wrong and gives out the wrong message to kids that being OK is good. I'm fed up with pretending that we all deserve a top prize for just taking part.
Michelle, I agree with you. You know, I think at the end of the day, we need to give our young people something to strive towards. And it's nice to win. And when we sort of say everybody's the same and we reward everybody just for taking part, it takes out the spirit of hard work, which is what the essence of this country is about. So
is it not? We're not trying to be too politically correct.
Yeah,
we're kind of missing the point here for a bit.
I think we are. I think that, you know, competition. I grew up being competitive.
You know,
and
I think that.
Oh, really?
What a surprise to all of you.
And you know, I wasn't the best at running, but you know, I found my edge.
But you somehow still won.
In business, you know, starting a paper round and doing this and doing more streets than my friends and all the rest of it. But I think that, you know, stopping all of the prizes and just everyone's a winner, we're just going to lose that competitive edge and that healthy competition.
Isn't it all about striving to be better? So let's not use the word win for a minute, but the whole emphasis of the concept is you get better. So only a few minutes ago, we were talking about Leicester City. Yes. You know, for years and years, it never won anything. But there was a reason to get better, to improve, to, you know, to excel in what you do. And I think if you take away the reason, the whole objective of that euphoria of achievement, you would take it away. Yeah. So I think, I really think we're just getting obsessed with, we have to be politically correct.
But there is quite a lot of evidence to show that actually the most successful sports, men and women, are those who were born between September and Christmas. Because they...
thank God for that.
Because... October.
Yeah, so you found it. But because... It's interesting that why? Because they were up to, you know, sometimes nearly a year older than the kids they were competing with.
Of course.
And if you're born in June, you are not likely... And that goes... And once that starts at 5 or 6, that goes right through your life. And actually, the evidence suggests that actually kids born in that period, in terms of sport, do better. Now, that can only be to do with competition so early in life, and that they're the big kids. They run well. They're seen as good. They're given more encouragement. The other kids are given less. It can't be genetically.
No, but I also think, as a society, we have to respect the fact we're all not the same. You know, in society, you have people who are more talented, run faster, work harder, you know, whatever it is. And I think, you know, we've got to accept that there will be people who'll be better than us, and that's OK.
And that's OK.
But I don't think we should try and defend it. And I think by trying to overly correct this issue, I think we're trying to diffuse, dilute society to say, you know, it's healthy competition, it's what... I just think it's pathetic.
But it also sets, you know, the kids up for the bigger world out there.
To fail.
Yeah. And
I'm slightly getting nervous because Emma hasn't said anything yet, so I think there's a bomb coming.
There's a problem. Emma!
I was just going to say, first of all, competition's brilliant for winners, right? So, and I would hedge a bet. I'm not saying you're all amazing in the egg and spoon race around this table, but I would hedge a bet we've all done pretty well to be at this table in the first place, to enjoy competition and to compete. But there will be people who are watching this who... They're not really the people you look at when everyone's going through the finishing line. They sort of slope off to the side. They feel terrible. Maybe they're a summer born and they should have been in a different year group
October
to compete. But actually, when you look at the definition of sport, which I did do in preparation for this, competition is enshrined in it. It is part of the... You have to win, right? So competitiveness is part of what sport is. Where I think we could extend this and have a slightly more... discursive discussion almost about something that we may not all agree on, because I think we all like the idea of sport being competition, is exams. So competitiveness within schools has really come off the sports pitch, I think, and gone into the examination of children. This week we saw children on strike about being tested at the age of 6 and 7. Thousands of kids, I think it actually was in the end, and many have signed this petition that we don't need extra examination. And what I'd be interested to hear, I know you've got children, I know you have children, but I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, because I had a very good experience at school in the main. I did do well, I worked really hard, I was very, very up for the exams, and I was like, I have to do really, really well. However, when meeting up with school friends later in life who I'm not that close to, they had a terrible time. They were going through the same school system as me, and they were made to feel, you know, by whatever you want, peer pressure and a mixture of schools, that they weren't doing well enough. And I bring this up because competition with exams has become about competition between schools. The competition for the league table, which kids are actually involved in providing the data for it.
And it's all about the numbers.
Does your view extend to, OK, let's go for it on the sports pitch, and then let's do exactly the same with kids examining?
Not as young as 6 and 7.
OK.
Because, you know, I'm dyslexic, and I had a terrible time at school. And if I was tested at 6 and 7, I think, you know, it would have been absolute trauma for me.
Really?
So I disagree with testing the kids so young. I think as they get a bit older, now what age is that? Is it 9, is it 10? But I think 6 and 7, they're just finding their way. I think the tests are a bit too strong and too nerve-wracking for the kids at that age.
But doesn't the test actually identify the issue? So if you are tested and you don't do very well, does that then help the school identify, you know, how to support you, where you fit in?
The school would have known that without the test. Let's not kid ourselves. They know which are the kids that are doing well and which ones need more help.
But sometimes, Greg, you need that qualification.
This is about testing the teachers, isn't it? Really, this is saying, are these schools good enough? Which school is this school good enough? I mean, I'm old enough, unlike any of you. I went through an 11 plus, and I was in a school where 40 out of 45 or something in my class all passed the 11 plus. Why? Because we had a teacher who was obsessed about getting us through the 11 plus. Go to the school up the road, they didn't have the same, and therefore they didn't get through, which is why the exam, the 11 plus exams, are so unfair. But I think we've come full circle almost at the moment, and we're so obsessed about testing, we've forgotten about teaching. We've forgotten about what education is about.
And I think
actually,
it's putting pressure.
You want your kids to have a wider education than just a very narrow set of exams that they've got to pass at 6.
And it's putting on pressure on the teachers as well. Completely. They do an amazing job. It's a hard job being a teacher, and I think on the kids as well. So I think it's just too young. 6, 7 is just too young.
And also, to your point, Emma, I think that at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with competition and testing children, provided that we show value to all subjects. Because at the problem, you know, we only place value on particularly the STEM subjects, and then obviously English. But for the kids that are much more artistic, I think if we value all of the different subjects that are available within the curriculum just as equally, then what happens is maybe you're not the kid that's good at maths, but you're the kid that's good at art. So therefore you're winning in art, and maybe you're not winning in maths, but that's not necessarily damaging your self-esteem because you know what you're good at.
I mean, I think
because we need to prepare our kids for the way the world is changing. We live in a competitive world. We now have competition from countries that we once ruled. So therefore we need to make sure our kids are ready for that.
But I think also we've got to look, what are we really successful at in this country? We're really successful in the creative industries.
Yes,
Why are we successful in the creative industries? Because of the education system our kids have gone through. And if we actually stereotype them all into, you know, it's all about passing this, this and this, and that's it, I think you're going to lose
a lot
what we're good at.
But also it's interesting, we've got largely a Victorian school system. I mean, when Michael Gove was the Education Secretary, he said, I want to actually bring even more back, you know, the sort of Victorian side of this, and that was very unpopular. But I'm very interested in if there's just different ways of assessing children, not on the sports pitch, but just keeping that competition alive, getting you ready for stuff. But I think we've not quite cracked some of that yet, and we are just going down examine, younger and younger.
I think there's a fun way to do it, and that's bringing business young. Getting to, you know, the fun side of business. And there is Young Enterprise who are doing that. 5-year-olds, managing director, finance director, and that's a fun way of doing it. And it's also a realistic way of getting into the real world as well.
Completely.
That was very good. I think on the subject of winning, I think it's my turn next. and I want to tell you about an unpopular truth about the collapse of the great British brand.
Provocative, straight talking, provocative, straight talking. Provocative, straight talking.
He's been called the Permatan Tycoon. He's become the villain of the nation. Of course, I'm talking about Sir Philip Green. But as a businessman myself who buys and sells companies for a living, I've actually taken the time to study the facts about BHS. I think this clamour for Sir Philip to pay back the dividends risks setting a very dangerous precedent. Thousands of companies fail every year. So we're actually saying that every shareholder of these firms should give back what they've been paid. Sir Philip took his dividends when BHS had made a £600 million profit when the pension deficit was negligible. We can't expect owners of any company to have a crystal ball and predict what may happen a decade down the line.
Well, James, I've got two issues with you on this. The first is he took out $400 million of dividends and paid them all to his wife, who lived in Monaco, so he never paid any tax on them. Right? So that's $150 million of money that the Exchequer should have had that they never got. It was within the law, but it was suspect. The second one is, when he sold this, why did he say, I mean, in your researches, why did he sell this company for £1 to somebody he already knew, when he knew it had this massive pension deficit?
I agree with you, Greg. I think the issue of selling it to somebody who's unqualified, I agree, I think probably was a mistake. I think the issue that I'm dealing with here is we've got a very successful businessman who today employs over 25,000 people, and we're trying to throw the guy under a bus. And just hear me out. So people are saying, you know, he's a villain, he stole. You know, there's various accusations been made against him. When as a private equity investor, I look at businesses and I buy and sell businesses. So I thought, let me just understand this issue. So number one, everybody's kind of making out that he stole the money from the pension scheme. He didn't. You know, Philip took a dividend, you know, legitimately when the company made a $600 million profit, and he gave himself a dividend. He didn't take a dividend when the business was losing money.
No, he gave his wife the dividend.
Whether it was his wife or him...
It was his wife living in Monaco, not paying tax.
With respect, that's got nothing to do with what the press is saying. What I'm saying is I'm really dealing with the issue of saying, was it wrong for him to take a dividend? And I'm saying, if a company makes a profit and you're a shareholder, there's nothing wrong with that. The press are accusing him effectively from stealing from the pension. You know what? He didn't steal from the pension. The pension is a separate pot. It is governed by pension trustees. Philip doesn't manage that. There are thousands of companies in this country today who've seen their pension pot go down because of the state of the stock market, because interest rates are low. So what governs the success or failure of a pension fund is not the success of the company. They're two separate issues. So my point, Greg, is very simply, we're accusing somebody of doing something, in my opinion, he didn't do. Then you've got this issue about his knighthood. They're saying, oh, strip away his knighthood. With respect, he was given the knighthood not for running BHS, because he set up the Retail Academy, which educates over 5,000 people a year, which he helped fund and started. Today, there are thousands of people who are in the retail industry because of the commitment that he made, which is why he was given the knighthood.
So he was given the knighthood. I mean, I always found it bizarre at the time that the Labour government would give a knighthood to someone who was deliberately avoiding paying tax.
Well, no, not
perfectly legitimate,
but it's legitimate.
Deliberately avoiding paying tax.
But Greg, with respect, if they want to change the policy, you know, they should change the policy.
Yeah, but you don't have to give a knighthood to someone doing that.
No, but my point is, he did something, but tax and doing something good for the community...
But I think James's point about the fact that the knighthood, it has nothing to do with this. And all I would say is, James, I agree that Philip didn't do anything wrong in the sense that he took the dividends out at the time when the company was profitable.
And June, 10 years ago.
And 10 years ago. But at the end of the day, Philip is one of the smartest businessmen in this country, obviously after you,
Clearly.
Clearly after you. So If he was looking for somebody to, let's say, take over the business and he was still going to own it, there's no way he would have hired the people that he sold the company to.
And I agree with you, June. So the decision of who to sell to was wrong.
So it was irresponsible to not think about his staff and not to sell the company to somebody who was going to protect those jobs.
OK, so let me answer that.
It's almost like he just threw it away and thought, oh, I'm done with it. I'm washing my hands of this. And I think that is what people are offended by.
OK, so let's look at that from a different point of view. If he hadn't have sold it to this guy, the company
who had been bankrupt 3 or 4 times or whatever it was.
The company would have gone into administration anyway. So whilst I agree with you, that was a bad choice and he shouldn't have done that, but the company was already doomed to fail.
But don't you think it looks like he did that to offload a company that's got a very large pension deficit?
I think it looks like that he knew what was going to happen. And by selling it to somebody else, it kind of diffuses the kind of the spotlight away from you.
But it didn't work.
No, but the point,
and it didn't work.
It didn't work.
Greg. But the point I'm making is, I'm talking about the 11,000 jobs that the press are absolutely savaging Philip on. What I'm saying is, sadly, unfortunately, a bit like Woolworths, BHS had its day. The brand kind of lost its way. You know, it's kind of customers lost interest. It was unfortunately going to go under anyway. So he had a choice. Either he could have put it under himself, and on retrospect, it would have been the right thing to have done. By selling it to somebody else and detracting away from you was the wrong thing to do.
So you don't think he had any moral responsibility at all to those pensioners who are not going to be able to get a full pension because it's an underfunded
Some people
scheme?
who've worked for that company for decades.
I believe that the pension pot is managed by pension trustees. A pension is governed by very sophisticated, hear me out, actuarial calculations. So I'll give you an example. I looked at the balance sheet of BHS, and in the balance sheet it says the pension deficit is 111 million. The press say it's 570 million.
Yeah.
The gap between, it's a huge gap, for God's sake. Why? Because they've used an actuarial calculation based on a set of assumptions over 25 years of where the stock market's going to be, what interest rates are going to be, etc. It's an artificial figure. It has no relevance. So
hasn't Philip said he's going to give 100 million?
80 million.
So 80 million pounds. So the point I'm making, my point is that you're using an argument that it's actually very artificial. Now, if you'd said to me that Philip went into the pension scheme, took £570 million out, which is what I think the papers allude and what the people in the street believe, of course he should give it back. I agree with that, because he took it, but he didn't take anything out.
So what would you have done in his situation then?
I would absolutely put the company into administration myself. Because, you know, and I've done that before.
So just to come in on this, 5 inquiries now into the collapse. 2 select committees, I think it's important to look at this. Pensions regulator, the preliminary investigation from the Serious Fraud Office, and the Financial Reporting Authority are going to look into the role of auditors and around that sale. He's coming back to the UK from Monaco because his wife was going to be the one that was called, because, of course, she owned BHS. And he's now going to be stepping into this. Yes, there's been an offer of 80 million. I totally get the distinction that you've made, and I think it's important to make that distinction, because it's very easy at this point to just, as you say, throw under the bus. What do you think should happen now? There are 5 investigations.
I think, well, number one, I think the investigations between you and I think, will find the same information that I did.
Between you and I?
Yeah, they will.
Between us all.
Sorry, what about the other
watching?
80 million people watching the show? No, no, I agree. So I think what will happen is, and I think, of course, if they think there is foul play, it should be investigated. I would wholeheartedly endorse that. I suppose my frustration is that, you know, and we covered this on the show recently, where, you know, we just love bashing people who are successful. You know, anyone who does well in this country, let me just hear me out. He's done well, and yes, he's got a boat, and yes, he's wealthy, but you know what? He's earned it. He spent his entire lifetime building a business, and the business has gone under. And just look at the press; they're literally throwing this guy under a bus.
I would like to say that I know Sir Philip, and he is an incredible business guy. He's done a lot for the UK economy, for jobs. But, you know, there's a big issue here, and the poor people, the staff, for their pensions. And I think what we've got to do, Emma, is allow the investigation to happen. And you know, they will make their judgment. And I'm sure, you know, Sir Philip, as I say, he does a lot for charity and everything else. I'm sure he doesn't want to let down these people.
And I absolutely agree with
that. I can't miss this opportunity. I've got to ask you.
Hopefully he will, you know, he will do whatever needs done.
You're both business people and you say you know him. I don't know him. I just want to hear the answer to this. There was a brilliant piece of reporting by the Sunday Times this week. It was called, the headline, "My Battle with the Bullying Billionaire,"
Yes, I read
by
it.
a writer called Oliver Shah. He has had, for like 3 years, tried to cover the sale of it. He wrote about the pension deficit, £1 being sold to Dominic Chappell, who nobody can seem to get hold of. He was faced with the most horrendous calls from Philip Green. I can't say any of the things that he said on them. You know, effectively offering to punch his lights out if any of this stuff. And at one point saying, "I'll get in touch with the editors of the newspaper, the owners of the newspaper, I will block this." He even said in there that newspapers a lot of the time won't even run this stuff about Philip Green because he's a massive player and he's a big advertiser. Knowing Philip Green, or knowing what you know of the business world, don't you think that seems slightly odd? That a journalist isn't allowed to report what is essentially financial matters, it's nothing personal about the Green family, and look at what was going on, like you say, in a very clear-headed way. Don't you think that seems very odd behaviour?
I think it's only odd, Emma, because if you look at how distorted the press have got their information... So what I'm saying...
This is before all of that.
No, but
this is 3 years ago.
OK, but the point I'm making...
And this is at every point throughout the process.
I understand. What I'm saying is the press, sadly, do not do their research correctly.
Oh, don't you think this is a moral argument, though?
And there's a smell about it.
Yeah.
There's a smell about the way it was... And that's why they're looking into it, the journalists. And they might get it right or wrong, but there's a smell
I just wish that they did their homework in the first
to
place, got the right information, and then made a comment.
It wouldn't change the fact, though, that the way this was handled wasn't right. It wouldn't change that. Because at the end of the day, the press haven't actually said he took money out of the pension.
I think
that's never
at the
been
end of the day, we just need to make sure that, you know, hopefully
the right thing is done, and I fully agree with that.
100%.
We should let the investigation find if there is any wrongdoing, the right action should take place.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully these people, these hard-working people, will be fine, and their pensions will be looked after. Will be okay.
I'm next. Get ready. OK, and I'll be telling you why equality at work is a big, fat lie.
Provocative, straight talking. Provocative, straight talking. Provocative, straight talking.
It is the prejudice with no name. Well, no acceptable one anyway. Fatism. As obesity levels soar, workforces in Britain are becoming, well, heavier. And there is ample evidence that fatter people are being left on the job scrap heap due to levels of unspoken discrimination that would simply be illegal if based on people's race, gender, religion or sexuality. That's why a top UK judge has suggested a new way to tackle such fattest prejudice would be additional legislation. Now, I'm not one for more red tape, but equally I don't want to live in a country that allows perfectly competent but overweight people to miss out on jobs or promotions. So it's time to protect people from one of the few remaining prejudices that corrupt our workplaces. And if new laws against fatism are the quickest and most effective way to do so, then so be it.
OK, Emma, I think this is just going way too far. You know, we've got enough to... Running a business is difficult, and we don't need any more red tape. And if someone is being discriminated about, you know, being fat in the workplace, then they should go to the line manager or go to the personnel or whoever that person is, and they should say that and they should deal with that in the right way. And if they don't deal with it in the right way, then that's not the place that they should be working in. Because in my company, when I had Ultimo, we had, you know, we encouraged people to get fit. We were in charity runs, etc., etc. And me personally, I was 8.5 stone overweight. And I know that it did affect me and my performance and my energy and everything else. And since I lost the weight and everything else, I changed as a person. But companies should be supporting the person who is overweight. If they say, look, I've got an issue and I need help, then that company should help them.
Let me just come back to that. I'll come to you in a moment. That's all very well and good. It sounds brilliant. Your company that you used to run and created sounds brilliant. But the reality is different, and I like to deal in realities, and I totally accept I do not have the experience of running a business, and I don't wish for businesses to be wrapped in any more red tape. But I think that's almost a sort of overlooking what is an unspoken issue here. And I'll just say to you, and also James, I know you're going to want to get in on this because you are very experienced in the recruitment world. But it's, you know, first of all, we're dealing with a quarter of UK adults are obese in this country now. And by 2050, that's UN figures. OK, I'm just going to have to go with my figures.
But is that the company's fault? Is that the company's fault because they're overweight?
Just let me make the case a bit more. By 2050, that's meant to be 50%. If we just look at Scotland, it's nearly 2/3 of people, right, who are overweight on the way to being obese. It's actually 27% are obese. I thought we could just look at the reality of the UK at the moment, because we're not very representative, actually, right now, in terms of our weight. You might be happy about that. I'm happy about that for us. But we aren't dealing in the reality, maybe even in this studio, of kind of what some people are dealing with. And I just wanted to say that some of the studies show basically that recruiters will always, when they put candidates forward to bosses, so this is, you were talking about within the company, but what about if you're not even through the door? There is a prejudice there that you will not be hired because they think of you as lazy, that you have a lack of self-control. I'm just repeating what some of these studies have found.
But you're generalising, Emma. You are absolutely generalising.
But these are studies that have been done with...
Where are you going to draw the line? And at some point, a business is going to be suffocating because what's the next one going to be? For skinny people?
Or bad breath,
you know,
meal,
come on.
You know,
where do you draw the line? You know, already, everybody, you know, you're just giving somebody says, you know, you're fat and next, I'll sue you, and all of a sudden you're in a tribunal. You know,
but
already...
you have to have the job in the first place. There is actually a movement going on now in this country for people who feel that overweight people are being discriminated against, and it's a taboo.
But
it is a taboo.
Why can't we just get employers to be more responsible?
Exactly.
How?
How would you do that?
Encouraging charity runs, you know, because I know what it's like. I've been there. I've been there where, you know, I want to get this off, and if you're around support
but
network,
that's assuming that everyone else wants to lose weight.
Well,
that's also some people are happy with the size they are. That's the assumption that everybody who is obese has a problem being obese.
Okay, so as an employer, you know, I think I have a responsibility to look after all the people who work for me, be it fat, skinny, you know, different races. That's my responsibility. It's like being a parent. So if somebody is doing something that's clearly unacceptable, I will deal with that. But what I don't need is more laws, more regulation, more red tape. That means eventually I'm suffocated as a business because, you know, the only people who ever win from these issues is the lawyers.
Are you suffocated by the Equality Act in this country currently?
No, I'm suffocating because there is rule after rule after rule, legislation that doesn't allow me to concentrate on doing what I'm supposed to be good at. And you and I both know that people abuse these laws. All of a sudden, somebody's going to take you to a tribunal because somebody's made a comment. You know, I just
We also know that the number of tribunals have gone down in this country dramatically because there's now a fee attached to them, which some people would say is very unfair. But what were you going to?
Well, I would say that. I would say actually there's no point you introducing the law because actually using the law is now too expensive. There's no to help you and the rest of it.
It's a good
Whether
argument.
you should use it, I think is a different discussion. Whether well, I mean, clearly. I mean, I talked to my daughter. I told my daughter we were going to do this. She said, don't come across as a conservative, boring old man, right? Which is how I think she sees me anyway.
Surely not.
Yeah. But what I tend to agree with you that actually you can't legislate against every sort of prejudice that exists in our society. You just can't do it. And one, it was quite clear we needed to do something on race. It was quite clear we needed to do something on gender. It's quite clear we need to do things on disability. There is a stage at which you say, hang on.
What's enough?
I mean, wouldn't we do better to spend our time, effort and energy actually in having fewer obese people?
Of course. But that doesn't seem to be the trend. I mean, the governments, whoever we seem to have, they say this is one of the most difficult issues. But this isn't a debate about how do we tackle obesity. And yes, in an ideal world, that would be what we all spent our time and energy doing.
Why don't we have a law about being thin?
Well, hang on. I just want to say something else then. I'm not wedded to the idea of a law. What I'm wedded to is the idea that people will be given the opportunity. And actually, it's not just about people who work in companies already. It's about giving the opportunity to people to let them feel like they are on an even playing field, regardless of how they look when they go for a job interview. And if I can just say, I volunteered for the last 8 years for an amazing charity called SmartWorks. So
brilliant.
every fourth Saturday, I go and dress a woman who has got, few women who have got a job interview, need some job training though, and they need an outfit. And sometimes,
they're from poor backgrounds.
And they're, economically disadvantaged, or they've fallen on hard times, or because they've been a mum, a single mum maybe, they haven't had the ability to go out. And what I've learnt through dressing those women, and dressing someone's quite it's an intimate thing. It's an intimate thing to do. A lot of the time, they will not be in the best shape. But it's all linked. If they get an opportunity, if they get a job, then they can be part of a company where there's a fun run. Then they can feel like they're better about themselves. But if they're being discriminated against at the door, which some of these studies, and yes, they will be generalising, but they are interviewing 181 recruitment consultants, they have tried to talk to people about the prejudices that are there when you go for a job. If they're there, how can we tackle them? If it's not law, what can we do?
Because I think, Emma, it's all about confidence. I think if someone walks into an interview and they're confident, no matter what size they are, no matter what the colour of their skin, their religion, whatever, if they are confident and they are right for that job because they have the skills for that job, then they will get that job.
Michelle, it's hard to be confident in a society that's constantly saying that there is something wrong with you.
Can I make a really important and critical point here? This is really, really important. If people really have an issue on how they get a job, I've written a book called Get the Job You Really Want. It's available on Amazon. I'm telling you.
What did you want to say?
I don't know, but it's not a flea puff like his was, that's for sure.
Well, I would just like to say, if it's not law, but it's very interesting that Judge Philip Roston put this forward, if it's not law, it'd be very interesting to hear from you, maybe at home, what you think we should be doing to help people who largely feel like they can go inside sometimes and just disappear because they're so concerned about that. But that is it from us. Stop puffing your book or whatever else. Send us a tweet if you've got any subjects you want us to debate. More argument and straight talking next week.
Provocative, straight talking, provocative, straight talking.
Hello, I'm Nick Ferrari. I'm back on the pledge next week when I fear Greg Dyke will be talking the usual script force.
Hi, this is Rachel. I'm on the pledge again on Thursday. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do know that I won't be presenting in my undies. See you on Thursday.
Provocative.